Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Jaya Girivaradhari. Jaya Girivaradhari. Jaya Gopi Janavallabha Jaya Girivaradhari. Jaya Girivaradhari. Jaya Jashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Jashodanandana Jaya Braja Janaranjana Jaya Jamuna Tiravanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Jamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare Jaya Radha Madhava Radha Madhava Radhe Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Shri Shri Radha Madhav ki Jai Shri Prabhupada ki Jai Gaur Bhakta Vrinda ki Jai. So I'll just quickly share my screen. We will chant the prayers to the spiritual master. Please chant along. Om Jnanam Timirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadammayam Dati Svapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavangsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitangsha He Krishna Karuna Sindho Deenabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyasya Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So chapter 4 is entitled Transcendental Knowledge. From the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has been praising knowledge about him. He spoke about in chapter 2, Buddhi Yoga. Then in chapter 3, he also talks about spiritual knowledge in relation to Karma Yoga. Now in this chapter, he actually describes what this knowledge is. So transcendental knowledge, this chapter is very, very important in the Bhagavad Gita because it's telling us what is this transcendental knowledge. And Krishna in this chapter says that there's nothing in this world more sublime, nothing in this world more sublime than transcendental knowledge. If it is real knowledge and if it is transcendental, if it's spiritual, then there's nothing that is more sublime. The problem is that that knowledge is very hard to find in this world. Any knowledge that we get in this world is not transcendental, or it's mixed. It's spiritual knowledge, but someone's interpretation of it. It's material and spiritual knowledge mixed. So it's not pure transcendental knowledge. But if someone gets that transcendental knowledge, there's nothing in this world that is as sublime. Just think about in our own lives, right? All of us on the call have at some point joined Krishna consciousness. Even if we had it since our childhood, we still, accepted it at some point in our life or gradually accepted it in our life. And we're so grateful for coming to Krishna. We're so grateful for spiritual knowledge. But how did we get it? What was the source? What was the beginning of our spiritual journey? For 99% of us, it was receiving a transcendental book. It was receiving transcendental knowledge from a source that was transcendental, and reading that knowledge, understanding that knowledge changed our life. And then, of course, we had to put it into practice. So when it doesn't end with knowledge, because now we may say, well, I thought bhakti is the highest. Why are we saying jnana is the highest? No, we then have to put it in practice. But one has to gain the knowledge in order to put it into practice. So while bhakti is the highest, still, even for bhakti, knowledge is necessary in the initial state. And therefore, there's nothing in this world as sublime as transcendental knowledge, because it all begins with knowledge. We have to know what to practice. We have to know on whom to meditate upon. We have to know the process of bhakti. So we don't undermine knowledge. It's just that eventually the devotee moves beyond knowledge, and then becomes completely in love with Krishna. But even that is a form of knowledge. It's not jnana, but it is vijnana, realized knowledge. It is the highest knowledge. Just like Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his Shikshashtakam, in the first verse, he says that the holy name is Vidya Vadhu Jivanam. It gives birth to spiritual knowledge, to transcendental knowledge. Vidya Vadhu Jivanam. It is the source. It is the from it all transcendental knowledge emanates. So this is why, for many people, they hear the holy name of Krishna on a Harinam or some recording, George Harrison, and by that they come to Krishna, because that holy name gives them an internal knowledge, a knowledge within their heart from which they seek more knowledge, and then they come to Krishna. So it's described how jnana and vairagya are the axe by which we can cut out of this quagmire of material life. And the devotees of the Lord, they use this axe to cut the bonds of this world. And once they have done it, and they've understood Krishna, they've realized Krishna, then they throw that axe away. So the gopis of Vrindavan especially is described that they have all the knowledge, but then once they are in love with Krishna, they don't use that knowledge, then they throw it away. But that axe is necessary to open the path for spiritual life. So I mentioned how this transcendental knowledge is not easily available, and that's the problem. Once we get it, it's sublime, but it's not easily available. So in the first few verses of this chapter, Krishna describes how do we get this transcendental knowledge? What's the process by which transcendental knowledge is given and received? And that is called parampara. And Krishna begins the Gita by describing the parampara, the disciplic succession by which this knowledge, this most fortunate transcendental knowledge that we have received, is being given to us. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha imam vivasvate yogam pruktavan hamavyayam vivasvan manave praha manurikshvakave bhavid. So I wanted to mention that actually in this chapter, some of the most famous verses of the Gita are there in this chapter. This particular verse is one that is quoted again and again by Srila Prabhupada as an evidence for the parampara system. But then later on, we have some very famous verses like Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya, which almost all of us know, which appear in the 4th chapter. The verse about the spiritual master appears in the 4th chapter. The verses about Varna Ashram appear in the 4th chapter. The famous verse that says Krishna rewards everyone according to how they approach him is here in this chapter. So very famous verses. These are verses that we must learn and know. So don't take chapter 4 lightly. Translation: the personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivasvan, and Vivasvan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. So this Gita, this knowledge of the Gita is eternal. And it's been shared to everyone since time immemorial. It's always been shared, all the way up to the sun god. Even the sun god has received this knowledge. And then in the next verse, Krishna describes himself, why he's telling this. This is the famous verse about parampara. Evam parampara praptam imam rajarshayo vidhu sakale neha mahata yoga nashta parantapa. This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science, as it is, appears to be lost. So it was received through the chain of disciplic succession, evam parampara praptam. And it was specifically given to the saintly kings. Why the kings? Because we just read, yadyada charati sheshtas. Whatever the great people do, common men follow. Whatever standards they set by exemplary acts, all the world pursues. So in previous times, the knowledge was always given to the leaders, to the kings. And then automatically all the citizens would become Krishna conscious. Automatically, the citizens would become very godly. They would be established in the mode of goodness because their king, their leader was like that. Imagine a kingdom. Imagine a place where the king is saintly. We don't even have experience of that in this world at this time. So we just assume that obviously leaders must be corrupt. And what do corrupt leaders do? They ruin the world. What do saintly kings do? They make the whole world into heaven by their spiritual influence. So it was given to the kings for a very specific reason, not because there's some bias, but because this is the best way. But in course of time, the succession is broken, and therefore society then goes downhill again. And now, because we don't have kings that are saintly, the knowledge is being given to everyone. It's a grassroots movement, so to say, where everyone in every place needs to receive this knowledge to eventually change the world. And then Krishna tells Arjun that this is the disciplic succession, and now he is reviving this disciplic succession by telling it to Arjun. This same knowledge that was lost because one king gives it to another, one person gives it to another, but someone breaks the link. So now Krishna's reviving it through Arjun. That very ancient science of the relationship with the Supreme is today told by me to you, because you are my devotee as well as my friend, and can therefore understand the transcendental mystery of this science. So Krishna is saying to Arjun, I'm telling you this because you are my friend. And because you're my friend, you can be a proper vessel to carry this knowledge, to first of all imbibe it and then carry it. Just like in previous times, the kings, they would sometimes hide their jewels by having, it was a great art, by having someone eat it. Like they had a piece of gold, or people would hide it like this, and they would eat it. It would be in their stomach. That was the most safest place to hide it. No one knows you have it. So they would keep it in their stomach, and then later on, when it was needed, then they would release it through the other hole in the back. So they could carry it because they knew the art of holding the jewel in their stomach. In the same way, one can only carry transcendental knowledge if one is pure in heart and mind, and one has imbibed it. This is a verse in the Bhagavatam, Mahajana yena gata sapantha, that the Mahajans, we follow in their footsteps. So one can only carry this knowledge if they imbibe it. And because Arjun is a friend of the Lord, therefore he is bona fide, therefore he is qualified to be a link in the parampara system. Prabhupada says the best spiritual master is the best disciple. So a perfect spiritual master is the perfect disciple. A person becomes a spiritual master when they are a disciple themselves. In the same way, one can be part of this parampara system when one is a friend of Krishna. And Krishna mentions this before also, that he's giving this knowledge to Arjun because Arjun is non-envious. He's a friend of Krishna. His heart is in the right place. He's not wanting to compete with Krishna. He wants to be the servant of Krishna. He wants to serve Krishna. So then Arjun asks a few questions that you can go through. Krishna describes how he is eternal. He can remember everything. Arjun cannot. And then Krishna describes his spiritual nature of his spiritual body and why he remembers everything. And this verse is very important. I just find this verse personally in my own preaching, I found it very important because this tells us why Krishna has a spiritual form. This is the most, I think, powerful verse against Mayavad philosophy. So when Mayavadis, they say God is formless, or generally what they say is that when God comes in a physical body, he is material. Not just Mayavadis, but even other religious traditions. When God incarnates in a body of flesh. God is, doesn't have a spiritual body. And Krishna, therefore, Rama, therefore, are all human beings. Right? Very common thing that they're human beings with bodies of flesh and blood. But Krishna here clarifies that no. Ajopi san avyayatma bhutanam ishvaropi san prakritim svamadhishtaya sambhavamyatma mayaya. Although I am unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all living entities, I still appear in every millennium, birth after birth, in my original transcendental form. Although I'm unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates. So Krishna is saying that he has a transcendental body. And although he has a transcendental body, he can still appear in this world in every millennium in his transcendental form. But when he appears, it's in his original transcendental form. So he is the source of the parampara. He is the one who revives it. He is the one who maintains it. And this is the fundamental difference between material knowledge and transcendental knowledge. Spiritual knowledge is perfect because it's perfect only because it comes from a perfect source. If a human had been the source of this, then it would be imperfect. But because it is coming directly from God, it is perfect because Krishna is perfect. Whatever comes from the perfect is also perfect. So Krishna is establishing here that he is transcendental. He is not, a living being with the 4 defects like other living beings. And when he's appearing in this world, one says, okay, but then he comes as a material. No, he's appearing in his spiritual form. And then finally, Krishna then says, well, what happens when this knowledge is lost? And then this is the context of these famous verses. He then says, well, this is why I appear in every age, in every millennium, to establish dharma and to destroy adharma. So this famous verse, yada yada hi dharmasya, you might be wondering, what's the context of this verse? This is why. It's actually in the context of parampara that this verse is spoken. Krishna is saying that just to keep this line, this sacred line, which is so important for society, this is the vital, call line that keeps the world alive. It's the knowledge by which every disease is cured, right? How important that knowledge would be. It's the knowledge that sustains this universe. That knowledge, just to establish that knowledge, I appear in this world. Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuthanam adharmasya tadatmanam shrajamyaham. Whenever and wherever there's a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. When the knowledge is forgotten, irreligion rises and then Krishna descends. But sometimes it's not so easy to establish that knowledge. The demoniac people are stopping it. They will not allow it. So then next verse, Krishna clarifies further. Paritranaya sadhunam vinashaya cha dushkritam dharma sansthapanarthaya sambhavami yuge yuge. To deliver the pious and to annihilate the miscreants, as well as to re-establish the principles of religion, I myself appear millennium after millennium. So we see many countries that don't allow the distribution of any spiritual literature, no religious books. We see many countries that don't allow this practice of spiritual devotional service. So what to do there? The knowledge may be there, but no one can practice it. So to annihilate the miscreants who don't allow the citizens the freedom of religion, the freedom to learn about spiritual life, Krishna also appears to annihilate such miscreants and to deliver the pious. Now, of course, Prabhupada explains that the real reason Krishna appears is to give pleasure to his devotees. He appears for the devotees. The annihilation is kind of a side job, which he doesn't have to do to appear. He doesn't have to appear to do that. He can just do that by creating an earthquake or a war between human beings and cause annihilation. But to give pleasure to his devotees, he has to appear in person, right? Just like some of us now, it's summertime, we may be visiting our relatives or parents or friends in India. So if there's some, you could say, financial difficulty for our relatives, we can always send them money. We can wire them money. If there's some problem to be solved in terms of business or something, we can always send someone else to do some work on our behalf. But the only thing that we cannot do without going there is express our love for someone. Because although we can in a limited way, but because that that is the expression of love itself, in some ways means meeting the other person, wanting to meet the other person. The expression of love is offering oneself to another. So Krishna can do everything in the spiritual world, from the spiritual world, but he cannot do everything. But he cannot offer himself without actually coming himself. He can, of course, he's God, but out of his love, he cannot. It's a you could say inherent. What is it? The word that I'm looking for. An inherent contradiction. Like saying, can you draw a square circle? You can ask God, God is all powerful, so can God draw a square circle? But you just said either a square or a circle. It is a logical contradiction. God is not required to fulfill our logical contradictions. So Krishna wants to offer himself to his devotee, but how can he offer himself without offering himself? So he appears just for his devotee. Everything else he can do. All the other business items can be taken care of. But love, that can only be expressed, or the very expression of love is one's own. Please make sure to mute your. Yes, is one's own presence. So Krishna appears for the sadhus, Prabhupada says in the purport. And then after these two, after establishing that Krishna appears in this world, he once again, Krishna establishes the divine nature of his appearance. And this again is one of the most quoted verses by Srila Prabhupada, one of the most famous verses of the Gita. Janma karma cha me divyam evam yo veti tattvataha Tyaktva deham punarjanma naiti mameti sorjuna. One who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjun. So you may recall that last time I was describing how karma just means action in the most general sense. So Krishna is saying his janma karma, his birth, janma, and his karma, his work, jame divyam, they are transcendental. They are divine. Evam yo veti tatvataha. One who knows this tatvata in truth, tyaktva deham punarjanma. That person never takes birth again in this world. Know this, O Arjuna. So simply by this knowledge, simply by knowing the nature of Krishna's transcendental appearance and activities, simply by that, one can go back home, back to Godhead. And one may think, oh, well, that's very easy. I know that. So that means I'm going back to Godhead. Yes, indeed. We might be the ones going back to Godhead because it's actually very rare in this world for someone to know God as a person. If you look at the world's religions, and this is something I noticed is something very true, it's hardly the case that a philosophy or a religion teaches that God is a person and a spiritual, eternal person with whom we can have a loving relationship. You look at Buddhism, it's a religion, but no God. Islam and Christianity, they do talk about God as a person, but they don't speak about the form of God. In Islam, it's actually a sin to speculate about the form of God. And in Christianity, there's no description of God's form. And Jesus Christ says that I'm not telling you this because you're not ready to know this. He openly himself says. So in Christianity and Islam, it's not there. In Judaism also, they talk about God as the Father, but there's no description of God's form and his activities. And this is why Shravanam, hearing, is so important. Because if we hear about the activities of the Lord, the pastimes of the Lord, that by itself frees us from the cycle of birth and death and makes us a liberated person. Right here, Krishna is saying, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities. So are we all going back to Godhead? Yes, the doors are open, but we need to know about his appearance and activities. We don't read about his pastimes. We don't know anything about Krishna's pastimes. We don't think about his appearance or meditate upon it. We are not meditating about Krishna's words and his activities. Then, yes, we know, but how much do we know? How much do we know? But if we know, yes, we can go back home, back to Godhead. And therefore, the devotees, the very serious devotees of the Lord, and here I speak to inspire myself also, they take shelter of the scriptures. The Shastra is their ashraya, their refuge. They take shelter of the scriptures because this is the path out of this material world. It gives us guidance. This transcendental knowledge is so rare. Just to establish it, Krishna appears in this world because it gives us guidance on how to break the cycle, to end all suffering, and to reach Krishna's abode. So transcendental knowledge should never be taken lightly. Just a little bit of knowledge, spiritual knowledge, can save us so much trouble, right? Years and years of, pursuing the wrong thing, right? People spend years of their life going for the wrong degree or wrong thing, and then they realize, oh, I just wasted my time. So knowledge is power. Even in the material world, people say this. In the material context, the most powerful thing is knowledge. Right now, the war between Ukraine and Russia, the most valuable resource for either side is intelligence, right? Is knowledge. What is the other side doing? And if they know that, then they can win the war. So, we must take shelter of this knowledge. I knew one devotee, didn't know him close, like immediately, but through other devotees, where he would always have one of Prabhupada's books with him. And the moment he had a minute, like let's say, he was on the phone and calling a company, you have to call the internet company or the phone company, and they put him on hold. So we generally waste that time, we're on hold, we listen to the music. The moment he had a moment, he's on hold, he would read one page. He would read one page of the scriptures. The moment he got, some time, he was sitting at the doctor's office, he would read. And in this way, he had no shortage of time. He had no shortage of reading. Because the nice thing about reading or studying books is that our intelligence becomes fully engaged. So we can actually become absorbed. When we are spiritually advanced, then like this devotee was reading, we can chant and be fully absorbed in between. But sometimes in the beginning, for us to get absorbed in chanting is a bit harder actually, because you have let's say a few minutes at the doctor's office, you chant, but you're looking at the person next to you, what is the kid doing, and you're really not chanting, or you might be chanting, not chanting, and you're not chanting good rounds. So better we actually spend our quality time when we have really morning time for chanting, when we can focus, and then these moments in between that we have of distracted times to read, because if you're going to read something, you have to focus, right? Or if he was at a stoplight, he would recite some verses. Of course, all of us, when we're driving, we should set up our system so that we can hear classes when we drive. Driving is so much time goes in driving for most people, and it's such a valuable time to hear. Please don't waste that time. Don't waste that valuable time. So just hear something, hear a class. It can change your life. One class, hear that while you're driving. So just by this knowledge, by hearing about Krishna, we can go back home, back to Godhead. And this is Krishna's promise. This person never takes birth again in this material world. At times, Prabhupada said this is the most important verse of the Gita. He says, spiritual life, going back to God, it is so easy. He says, just know, just understand knowledge about Krishna's appearance and activities, and you'll go back to Godhead. He says, realize it also. Act on that level. By serving Krishna, by worshiping the deity, we also understand Krishna's transcendental nature, because we get experience of Krishna's transcendental nature. So knowing doesn't necessarily just mean reading or hearing. Through our practice of Krishna consciousness, we also get to know Krishna. And that's why devotees who do a lot of service, they are very dear to Krishna. They know Krishna because they've served him, and therefore Krishna reveals himself. They start to understand Krishna's nature, his activities, his appearance. Okay, so now after this highlighting these very important verses, which are just the beginning of chapter 4, I'm going to now go to my slides here. I don't think I'll finish chapter 4 today because of our shortage of time, because there's a lot of important verses towards the end also that have to be covered. But now that we've read, I want to give some overview. So chapter 4, Transcendental Knowledge. These are the 5 sections of chapter 4. The first one, which I just covered, so this was the first one, is transcendental knowledge about Krishna. This is text 1 through 10. How is that knowledge received? We talked about parampara, how important that knowledge is. Krishna appears just for giving that knowledge. And what is the result of knowing that knowledge? One goes back home, back to Godhead. The second part is Krishna as goal of all paths and creator of Varnashram. So this is a part that's really exciting for me. I want to share it with you. We'll do it next time. It's about Varnashram. Krishna is the creator of Varnashram, and he establishes it in chapter 4. He does so very nicely, and it's very deep, this section. The third section, again, Krishna comes back to Karma Yoga. He describes the difference between action and inaction. The fourth one is sacrifices that lead to transcendental knowledge. This is about yajna. So how do you get knowledge? You get it through sacrifice. Very interesting point. How a person cannot receive transcendental knowledge, cannot realize it, cannot even understand it, even if they hear it, unless their lifestyle and their life is compatible with that knowledge. This is why Prabhupada says the 4 regulated principles. Why not just read and chant? Because sacrifice has to accompany transcendental knowledge. Yajna goes with jnana. So making sacrifices in our life gives us deep realizations. And that is true transcendental knowledge. And we all must have experienced this. When we make a sacrifice in our life, we actually become deeper people. We get deep realizations. Once Badrinarayan Swami told me this. He said that if you serve Krishna in spite of all difficulties, you stay in the same place. You don't keep switching your services. You don't keep switching your temples and you tolerate and you keep doing your service, then deep realization about Krishna comes. So this is, other devotees have also said that this is something true. Superficial people, selfish people, artificial people don't get real knowledge. But people who are actually interested in making a sacrifice for Krishna and Krishna's devotees, they get true spiritual knowledge. Because Krishna, that sacrifice itself deepens a person's, one can't avoid the truth. It deepens a person's realization about spiritual life. And in the last section, Krishna gives a summary of transcendental knowledge. That when we summarize everything, Krishna says this part, that there's nothing more sublime in this world than transcendental knowledge. So these are the sections that we'll be going through. Krishna has appeared in this world now. He's giving the parampara system. He's appeared to this whole world. And this is what I just covered here. Now, after giving this knowledge, Krishna recognizes the fact in text 11 that there's many different levels of knowledge, many different types of knowledge. And this is people say often the confusing part, that Krishna is giving the Vedas and the Puranas, and he's giving the Bhagavad Gita, and they're saying so many different things. So why is he confusing us? He's not confusing us. He's giving many different levels of knowledge for different levels of people based upon what they are ready for. Ye yatha mam prapadyante tang sathaiva bhajamyaham mama vartmanu vartante manushya partha sarvasha. As all surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pritha. So, as we surrender to Krishna, Krishna rewards us accordingly. But there's no path outside of Krishna. We are all on the path of surrender. Now, sometimes we're going in the wrong direction and Krishna has to turn us back. Sometimes we're going on a very slow path. Sometimes we're taking a detour. But if we surrender to Krishna more, then Krishna will reward us more. It all depends upon our level of surrender. Okay, so I will stop here now. We've covered the first section of chapter 4. Next time we'll do part 2 and we'll finish chapter 4 next time. We have about 10 minutes. So if anyone has any questions, any reflections, comments, they can make them now. Okay, yes, Anita Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I have a question regarding verse number 7, right?
Okay.
The 7 says Yada Yada Hi Dharmasya.
Yes.
So Krishna comes up, in certain conditions, certain situation, right? So
Yes.
my question is that during the time interval, Lord Buddha came, Shankaracharya came, and other expansion they came, right? But it seems like one incarnation is actually contradict the another. For example, Lord Buddha came in order to stop the Shankaracharya philosophy. So how do I understand these things that Krishna or his incarnation come and help to improve the dharma or reestablish the dharma?
Yes. So actually, you're asking a very nice question, and therefore I ended with this verse. This verse is exactly in response to your question, because after describing the highest knowledge, Janma Karma Chame Divyam, after the highest goal in some ways, to know Krishna's transcendental appearance and activities, then Krishna says that how in this world, different people are on different levels. And the more a person surrenders to Krishna, the more he rewards him. So Krishna appears in this world not just for those who are most sincere, but Krishna appears in this world to help those who are not so spiritually evolved as well. Krishna appears to help others as well. So not every time when he appears is he revealing the highest knowledge. Sometimes he is giving knowledge that will help people advance, but it's not the highest knowledge. Why? Because they are not ready for it. They are not willing to accept it. So based on their level, he's making them advance to the next level. So first Buddha came and he taught people to be nonviolent, because people were doing violence in the name of religion. That's the worst thing a person can do. So he was helping them to rise from that level to the level of nonviolence. And if he taught them anything else, they would have been confused, or the mission would have been undermined. So he said, forget everything, forget all scriptures, just practice ahimsa, practice nonviolence. And therefore, Prabhupada also says that spiritual life begins with nonviolence, which actually, very interesting how the Gita connects, it's so beautiful, is the previous verse, verse 10, which I skipped. We did 9 and then I went to 11 in due to the lack of time. But verse 10, very famous verse, says, Vitaraga bhaya krodha manmaya mamupashrita bhavo jnana tapasa puta madbhava magata. Being freed from attachment, fear, and anger, being fully absorbed in me, and taking refuge in me, many, many persons in the past became purified by knowledge of me. And thus they all attained transcendental love for me. So here Krishna is describing what is the qualification of getting this knowledge. What is the qualification that we need? He's saying being freed from attachment, fear, and anger. So until and unless we're on the level of attachment, fear, and anger, we cannot get this, we can't become fully purified by knowledge of Krishna, or that knowledge of Krishna does not act in that way. So Buddha came to teach that first give up your anger, give up your violence. Give up violence towards the animals, towards one another. People were also fighting. Wars were always there. Ashok, right? King Ashok, all these things. And they were killing each other. So he was telling them, become non-violent. They weren't ready for anything else. Then as Shiva, he appears as Shankaracharya. He gives them knowledge, okay, there's some higher Brahman, some higher reality. Let's bring the Vedas back. Let's bring transcendental knowledge back. Then after that, he sends Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, all of these great Vaishnava teachers who literally took over the whole land of India with personalism, love for Krishna. So like this, he gives knowledge of many different types from many different people. And even to the present day, there's some people who are not ready for bhakti. So for them, yes, they practice Buddhism and they worship God unknowingly in the form of Buddha. And then they make spiritual advancement. Or they become Mayavadis. At least they give up material life and they start to think about Brahman, Atato Brahma Jigyasa. What is the goal of this life? Why am I here? What is the purpose of my existence? And then others, like the fortunate devotees on this call, who are ready for spiritual knowledge that is the complete, full, whole, they get this spiritual knowledge. But all of them are on Krishna's path, and they're surrendering to their degree. Yes.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you. It was a very nice question, actually.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Yes.
Yeah, Prabhuji, Murli Govindas here this side. So Prabhu, I have one question. Generally, it is said in India that whenever you worship any demigod, it will go to Krishna only. Because when we try to preach to them, they said that we are doing this devotee work, this deity worship, this demigod worship, that demigod worship. So my question is how to convince such people that only Krishna is ultimate and there is no need of demigod worship, because a lot of debate come on this. You must have also gone through the same issue while preaching, right?
Yes.
So can you throw some light on that, bro?
Well, Krishna clarifies this in the Gita. He says, Avidhi Purvakam, that those who worship the demigods, they are worshiping me alone, but they are doing it, but they're worshiping me in the wrong way. So Krishna knows about this problem and he clarifies it in black and white in the Gita. So the solution is like this chapter is saying, sharing transcendental knowledge, telling them that see, Krishna in the Gita is saying that yes, by worshiping the demigods, you are worshiping him. But he says, Avidhi Purvakam, you are doing it in the wrong way. And so let's follow the Gita, let's follow Krishna. And you can ask them, do you accept the Gita? And the nice thing is that at least even to this day in India, everyone accepts the Gita. So it's there in the Gita. Yes.
Thank you so much, bro. Bro, can you tell me the verse number so that I can read through it?
Yes, I will tell you that. I'll share it on the WhatsApp group. So after the class.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure, bro. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Madhava Prabhu, I think you have a question, and then we'll stop after that. I'm sorry, actually, I have to go. Yes.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I just had a quick question that so before Shankaracharya, was there a widespread of impersonal philosophy, or was it there in terms of Brahman realization, but not necessarily the Mayavad philosophy?
Before Shankara, or what Shankara did, you said?
Before Shankara. So like I've heard that the impersonal wish or the impersonal desire to merge with Brahman, it was still there before Shankaracharya came. So then
Yes.
Is it that the Brahmavadi concept was there before, but then the Mayavad concept came after Shankaracharya? So I just wanted to get that clarified.
Yes. Oh, nice question. I think both were there, and Shankara just made it more prominent in some ways. Use that philosophy, like you're saying. Yeah, I guess impersonalism was always going to be there because some people are not going to be, some people are always going to be envious of God, and but the Brahmavadi, like you're saying, that is not in Mayavad. So for the rest of you on the call, there's one understanding that God has light. Light comes from God. God is all pervasive, and we worship the all pervasive aspect of God without saying that we are God or denying the personal aspect of God. So even the Kumaras, right? They were Brahmavadis. So it's clearly there. But then you have the Mayavad philosophy that says God does not have form, and in fact, we are God. That is Mayavad. And that Mayavad philosophy, I'm sure it was there because it's just an expression of, you could say, being envious of the Lord. And so I'm sure it was there. Yeah. I don't have actually any specific evidence.
Thank you, Prabhu. One more question, Prabhu, is that fine? The one last.
Maybe we'll take it up next time.
Okay.
Yes, we'll take it up next time, Prabhu. Just so happens. Tell me the question. Please go ahead. Yes.
So my question was that, we talk about Evam Parampara Praptim, there's a whole lineage. So as a way or as an argument in preaching against Mayavad philosophy, there's no part of Shankaracharya's lineage that is necessarily connecting to Vyasadeva, is what I'm guessing. That's my question. Is there any, because I mean, if I were a Mayavadi, my question would be, is there a part of Shankaracharya's lineage that's connecting to Vyasadeva since he's the creator of the Vedas? So is there such a thing?
Yes. So Shankaracharya actually twisted and misrepresented Vyasadeva's philosophy. But in Vyasadeva or in the Vedas, there's no teaching. There are verses that can, since God is both personal and impersonal, there's verses that talk about the impersonal aspect of God, but there's no teaching of Mayavad philosophy. Why? Because Vyasadeva is incarnation of God, and he cannot give the wrong philosophy. So he may not give the full thing, or we may be able to misunderstand it, but he cannot give the wrong knowledge. So yeah, to answer your question, that Vyasadeva didn't misrepresent.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Brandy, next time we'll start with your question. I apologize. Yes. Thank you. Very nice to see you. Very nice to see everyone. Have a wonderful week, and we will meet next Saturday as normal. Thank you.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Dandavat. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.